All right. This is Rob Sanchez with MouthMedia Network. I'm here with Jeff Madoff. And Jeff, I'd love to have you introduce yourself a little bit and share what you've been up to.
Well, thanks for having me on, Rob. And I've been, God, it's such a strange time, and I think we've all been experiencing that. Uh, from lockdown, the year that didn't exist, 2020, and now we're coming on to the last quarter soon of 2021, which has just zipped by like crazy. But I've been fortunately very busy. I've been busy with the play that I've written and producing, and that opens in March of 22, called Personality, the Lloyd Price musical. We've been doing some production work, which was great because production stopped dead for several months. And we've been going into new direction, but also some things that we have done before. So we just finished a really cool fashion production that's going to be launching in about 2 weeks. It'll be teased on social media for a line called Nigel Curtis, which is really beautiful clothes for men and women, custom made and gorgeous. But also the big shift has been positioning companies for sale or investment. And we've been doing that. And because private equity, acquisition, M&A, all of that area has been incredibly busy, throughout the pandemic. And there's certain businesses, that being one of them, home improvement, streaming video, home delivery, all these things have been going really well during this. And so it's a question of, in a very strange and shifting marketplace, figuring out where are the opportunities and how can you take advantage of those opportunities. And I'm teaching. You've been to my class, and I teach a course at Parsons School for Design called Creative Careers, Making a Living with Your Ideas. My book came out in June of 20, same name as the class. And it's based on my class, and I love the teaching. And so I've been promoting my book via podcasts. And so it's been a busy time, but it's also been a time for reflection.
Yeah. I'd love to talk a little bit about the shifts you've seen in brand storytelling, and kind of jump in at the point where you were talking about the shift to the conversations you were having with selling companies and mergers and acquisitions and so on. I think that's kind of an interesting point to start our conversation. And then we can dive a little bit into what branding means and so on in that context.
Sure.
So yeah, if you want to share some thoughts, what did you start to see initially when M&A activity picked up? Where did you start to see opportunities in the storytelling? And then how have you seen it evolve over the last few, I guess, quarters?
Well, I've always been a champion of, strong believer in storytelling. And, it's already become one of those phrases that's been pounded into the ground and has become a cliche. But storytelling is how we bond, because people remember, and it's Maya Angelou's great quote, that people remember how you make them feel. And storytelling is a way to make people feel something one way or the other. And so storytelling has always been a huge part of creating a brand. And, witnessed by me writing a book, by doing a play, storytelling has always been a huge part of what I do, and in my production work too. And our work in that area actually started before COVID. And I was really fortunate. At the head of middle market for Lazard, which is a global banking firm, approached me to position a company called Holly, which makes high performance auto parts, about a $450 million company or so, 450 to 500 million, I believe.
Yeah.
To position them for sale. And I guess he was aware of my work, and he wanted to apply the storytelling to positioning the company for sale. And we worked together. It worked incredibly well. We're credited with not only getting more potential buyers enlisted, but also getting a higher price than they anticipated for the company because there was competition for it.
Yeah.
And so I was very fortunate that David recognized how good storytelling could be applied to this. And that started again before the pandemic. I think that there are things that happened during the pandemic that made it even more important, but that's kind of how things started off. And that was a few months before the pandemic.
Yeah. And once the pandemic started, did it give you a chance to kind of reflect on that experience and how it related to the other work you'd done? Or like what happened for you inside the business?
Well, to say that it gave me a chance to reflect puts it in a very nice way. It's more like, a sledgehammer hit me in the face. And all of a sudden we had to move from our office, couldn't go into work, production business stopped. And, so there was a lot of things that were going on that were buffeting. Once it was clear that we were going to be locked down for a while, then the reflection sets in, like, what am I going to do? How am I going to deal with this? Because, the ongoing business stopped. And, and this isn't just me, all production companies. I have friends in the movie business that had films in various stages of shooting and production all over the world. The things just stopped. Some of them were 3/4 of the way done. Some of them were just getting started. Shows that were just ending previews on Broadway and ready to open, and boom, it all just stopped.
Yeah.
So it didn't just give me a chance for reflection. It was a gong that got hit, and it becomes survival. Well, how are you going to do what you're going to do, and how are you going to do what you love to do? Because it's a very different world right now.
Did you find that the mediums shifted at the same time the production shifted? So did you search out new tools? Did you look for new venues for conversations? What was kind of that response period like?
Well, it was really interesting because the lockdown forced innovative thinking.
Yeah.
In a lot of businesses. So all of a sudden, TV networks had to come up with ways to keep their daily shows live, but they couldn't produce them out of the studio. They couldn't have an audience. They couldn't have crews. So what were they going to do? How do you do that? And how do you do it quickly when there is literally billions of dollars at stake in terms of that major industry? And so, one of the things that became a huge factor is Zoom, which all of a sudden became a part of the vernacular. And that was really incredible, just how Zoom came in, and took over. And it makes me think of how there are businesses that are out there that seem to have a market, and then somebody comes in, and it's not like Zoom was a new player. I think they've been around since 2011 or something.
Yeah.
But their growth during 2020 was astronomical. And if you think about it, and this ties into the branding and storytelling and all of that, it was Skype. Skype was the one that sort of had that market for a while, but it hadn't blossomed so fully.
Yeah.
And then Zoom comes in, and all of a sudden, instead of, well, let's do a Skype call, everything was Zoom. And it's kind of amazing. And it's like when Sony had the Walkman, and then Apple came in, sort of enhanced the quality of the deliverable. And all of a sudden, everything was about the iPod, and the Walkman was
second
gone.
mover. second mover advantage, right? Like you
Yeah,
can see the mistakes, you can see the positioning, you can reposition inside of that knowledge base versus being the leader.
right, right. And so it's really interesting. And I've heard, of course, heard the phrase second mover advantage, except there's also the first mover advantage because if you
Exactly.
get your name out there and you become dominant in the marketplace, if you're Google, you know, you,
Mhm.
you if you do it all smart like they did, the
Yeah.
second mover is so far down the line that it's a speck in the distance over your shoulder.
It
But
is interesting that they didn't pick up market share on the meeting, on the virtual meeting at all, or very little during the pandemic compared to
they
Zoom.
tried, and they actually tried and did something which uh, I think was kind of deceptive, although it's in the scheme of things in this world, it's a little league deceptive, but it is deceptive, which is, a lot of us, because we use Gmail,
Yeah,
uh, you use the Google Calendar. So when you schedule a Zoom meeting and you save it to the calendar, the first thing at the top of the list
is
is
the
Google
Google Meet.
Meet.
Yeah.
Right. And so I've had so many times where people say, oh, I went to Google Meet. I thought it was a Google Meet. And that's just something that Google did to mess with you,
Yeah,
and
that was
try to
like the
capture
first
market.
year. It actually decreased my usage of Google Meet though.
Yeah, it was
I
really
was like, "Oh,
annoying.
never them,
Yes.
never them."
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, we're gonna do smoke signals before we deal with them. Um, so once you kind of got into it and started working with Zoom and so on, where did you go with the business? How did you start to approach new opportunities and kind of think inside of the open space that the pandemic left?
Well, good question. And what I did was, the first ongoing regular contact I had with Zoom was, in March of 20. After the second week in March, the classes I taught all shifted to Zoom.
Mhm.
So I got, I was already kind of comfortable on it, having been to some conferences using it. But then having to use it in my class, I became quite facile with it. And it was, easy and familiar to use.
Yeah.
And so what I started thinking about, looking at what was being done on television, for instance, and how shows had adapted. This is at the same time that that same person, David Solomon, actually hired me again to position another company, Hunter Fan, which has
Mhm.
huge dominant position in the ceiling fan. But they actually invented the ceiling fan. Little
Oh, wow.
historical trivia of technology that I didn't know, but somebody had to invent it, right? So they did. Uh, and their offices are in Nashville and in Memphis.
Mhm.
When they wanted us to shoot which was July of 20. COVID was spiking wildly in Tennessee. I didn't want to
Yeah.
go, but instead of positioning it that way, uh, I said that, we can save you money and on travel, hotels, per diems, and all those kinds of things because I can direct this and we can produce it via Zoom. So I worked with local crews actually in counting New York, 4 different cities, but I
Mhm.
directed the entire enterprise from where I'm sitting,
Yeah.
and it worked out great, and I loved it. I loved doing it that way. It solved a big problem because not just me, a lot of people did not want to travel at that point. They didn't want to get on a plane.
Yeah.
And, that was including key executives, which they felt for something like this, they'll go to the headquarters. And they said no. And so we produced it on Zoom and realized, wow, this is really great because we can actually provide something to the client. The logistics are less complicated. And as long as we're working with great crews, which we always do, we can work with local production and work it through
Mhm.
Zoom and create a deliverable that no one would ever know that it was done that way.
Yeah.
So it was a problem solution situation that really worked.
Did you find that the conversations that you had around the brand itself shifted as well, or was there an opening for new ways of positioning companies and so on that opened up? You had mentioned earlier that branding is about that storytelling and that connection. How does it make you feel? And it seems to me like the pandemic left us all feeling lonely. Did that play in at all to the way that you approach the storytelling around the businesses, or what was the impact on that side, on the actual brand side?
Well, it was percolating when I did the first job like that. Now, to go back in time quite a bit, I did the major brand positioning piece for Ralph Lauren. That was in the early 90s, right?
Yep.
When they had gone public. And so, what the messaging was and all of that was pretty clear. And I had already been working with Ralph for quite a long time. And so I realized in the way that I wanted to tell this story, and fortunately got the opportunity from Ralph to do it, that there's a way of telling these stories that is more engaging. And so when the Holly situation came about, and this is pre-pandemic, I felt that what had become more important than ever before, and this is carried through the pandemic, but is the notion of trust. Consumers, buyers, investors, they need to trust the company that they're going to buy from, that they're going to acquire. And so that ties back into management, because it's really interesting. But when you talk to people that invest, especially in startups, or if they're going to acquire a business, they want to know that there's good management in place. And so trust becomes a huge part. And we see what happens when trust is violated. So we saw that with Uber, for instance, where the brand took such a hit for some of the awful things that became public via social media about what they did. And they're still suffering from that. So what happened is they lost trust. Now, it is interesting because Facebook has lost tremendous amount of trust, but I guess they still have the most effective ad targeting out there. So they've been able to keep going because everybody is after profits. So it's not consistent. But, all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, but, with Zuckerberg, you didn't used to know CEOs of most companies. That's a fairly recent phenomenon. Every once in a while, there would be like a Frank Perdue for chicken. And it probably started with Walt Disney when he would be in our homes when I was a kid every Sunday. But, brands were kind of faceless, and it was just about the brand. Well, now it becomes about the management. So everybody knows who Elon Musk is. Everybody knew who Steve Jobs was. Everybody knows who Mark Zuckerberg is. And so the credibility and trust factor has become huge for businesses. And that's one of the things that really, I think, came to blossom even more so in COVID, because everybody was so frightened. And the question is, who can I trust? Who can I invest with? Who can I buy from? And, that I think accelerated during COVID, but it was starting before that.
That's fascinating to think about trust and that communication. How do you build? So I guess there's like three phases of that, right? Like you have the initial trust, and if it's broken, how do you rebuild it? And if it's like solid, how do you grow it? And do you have any thoughts on ways that you can, I guess, like quantify the trust level of a company, and then how do you build and amplify that?
Well, there are companies like Edelman, which is the largest public relations company in the world, and they do a report on trust and consumer trust, and then they do quantify it and graph it, and all these kinds of polls are snapshots in a moment of time. So it depends on when those are taken, but I think that so anchor me on the question again, because
Yeah.
it's these things become moment to moment sometimes, because a company can have a high trust profile and something happens. Somebody drags somebody off an airplane on Fly the Friendly Skies of United, and you see somebody being dragged out of the plane, and their company takes a hit for a while.
Yeah.
And there's a two-way communication that didn't used to exist not very long ago, that that the public can talk back and also take down a company in some cases too.
Yeah. I saw recently on WeFunder, a company that, they had a lot of momentum, and then they had to publicly retract some of the statements that the CEO had made, and notify everyone who had invested. And then of course it
Yeah.
causes that spiral down. Um, is there anything that can be done to rebuild trust, or is that just going to be a slow and painful process? And then the other side of that question would be, how do you capitalize on what you do have, knowing that it's a commodity that can be spent?
Well, I think the answer to the first two parts is yes, you can try and regain it, and it's a painful process.
Mhm.
I think that a lot of companies depend on the public having a very short attention span.
Yeah.
And so if they can ride out the criticism, they hope that it kind of goes away. And that's the wrong approach.
Mhm.
Because again, nowadays, there are people that their entire existence is about stoking things online, which is unfortunate. But that's the world that we live in now. And
Mhm.
so the rebuild, I think you can look at Uber and see that the rebuild is very painful and costly.
Mhm.
and I remember back in the 80s, do you by any chance remember? You might be too young to really remember it in detail, but Tylenol, that was
Mhm.
owned by McNeil Labs. Uh, there were people that died taking Tylenol,
Mhm.
and they did not know what was going on. Was somebody tampering with the pills? They knew it was something, but they didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
They took the position that they were not only going to pull everything off of the market, they're going to be fully transparent with the consumers. And this is all pre-social media, and that they were going to do the right thing. I remember that was the first time I thought, wow, I'm feeling something for this company, which I never
Mhm.
felt before.
Right.
Coincidentally, it was a kid that I grew up with who was running consumer marketing at McNeil Labs who captained that with the
Mhm.
with the CEO backing him up. And he said, "We don't know what's going on, but our goal is to keep you safe. So we're going to pull everything off the shelves."
Yep. Figure it out. Relaunch.
Right, and let you know. So they gained actually a lot of customer goodwill because what they didn't do is they didn't put profits first. They
Mhm.
put their customer safety first. That became a case study at Harvard Business School, Stanford Business School, Wharton.
Mhm.
And I was talking to my friend who did that. And separately, I spoke to one of the heads of crisis management at Edelman about
Mhm.
that. And my question was, we know what the right thing is to do. Be upfront, be honest, because the longer you deny it, the bigger
Mhm.
the pile of crap is you have to dig your way out of, because you are going to be found out, especially today with social media, because there are
Yeah.
people that are just relentless on that. And I said, but why don't these companies do it? There's still people making the same mistake. They give untrue answers. They're disingenuous to their customers. And then eventually they have to come out with an apology. So why don't they do it from the beginning? Interestingly, both people gave me the same answer when I said, why is this the case? And they said, because most CEOs are arrogant and they think they
Mhm.
can get away with anything. And until they really get smacked in the face and realize there's no way out, you know, then they will own up to things. And so what they try to do at first is deflect.
Mhm.
And hoping the attention span of the public is short enough that it'll go away. But some of these issues don't go away so quickly.
Yeah.
And I think with Facebook, we're seeing a steady erosion where younger people don't care about Facebook. And, advertisers still do, and that keeps them profitable. But
Mhm.
they're not going to stay profitable if more and more younger people lose their platform because they're just not interested, they don't trust it, or whatever. So sometimes it's a slower erosion, but the PR image of them has been chipped away at now for the last few years.
Yeah. There's an NPR piece that was saying one of the people they were interviewing said they face two problems. One is that their growth is where they don't care, and two is that they have no traction in the profitable segments that they want to develop. And the concern was that that's going to lead to sort of erratic behavior that's untrustworthy. How do they're seeing growth in overseas companies where they don't have a presence, but they're not seeing a growth in 13 to 18-year-olds. And what incentives does that cause? And so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out a little bit. Yeah. As far as working with executives and so on, inside of the positioning, have you seen or run across instances where people need to be removed to rebuild that trust? And how does that play into some of the work that you're doing and the positioning? I mean, you had said that, often the executives are arrogant. Well, sometimes that hen comes to roost, so to speak. And then the company as an entity needs to move on. What do you see happen in that situation?
Well, there's things that we've all seen in the paper. So, I hope I'm not screwing up his name, but like Travis Kalanick from Uber, he was
Hmm.
taken
I
out of the
think
company.
colonic is appropriate, even if it's not correct.
That's true. And so, we have seen those things where, a manager was from the Raiders was just
Yeah.
basically taken out, for stupid, racist, sexist, homophobic comments. And, the comeuppances happen really quick now.
Hmm.
And, whether that's a good or bad thing, that's a whole other discussion, because we live in a culture where you're often guilty till proven innocent.
Hmm.
In the case of this guy, all the evidence was against him, and he was a foolish big mouth that seems to me deserved what he got. But there are other things that are kind of more subtle about the businesses. So, we've all seen many examples where CEOs, upper management has been taken out. One of my uh, biggest clients for over 20 years was Victoria's Secret.
Hmm.
Victoria's Secret hit a huge wall of bad publicity, incredibly negative. And now they're throwing a Hail Mary pass. There's new management. Everybody is out that was in those high management positions, just about everybody. And they're throwing a Hail Mary. They put together a board of advisors or directors that most of them who probably would never wear Victoria's Secret, but what they're trying to do is they're trying to repair their image. So when you say the
Hmm.
painful long term, I think we're seeing that play out, for instance, with Victoria's Secret, and how they come out on the other side is anybody's guess. But I think that it's a very tough time for a company like that. And they were also so dominant, all they had was market share to lose. And that's
Hmm.
the same thing, by the way, with Uber. You know, uh,
Yeah.
Not too long ago, Lyft was hoping to be bought by Uber, and now they're the main competition to Uber.
Right.
So it's a really shifting landscape. And when the upper management is forced out, whether it's because of a hostile takeover or whether it's the board of directors realizes that the value of the company is in tremendous trouble, uh, that kind of thing happens. And I experienced some of it with Victoria's Secret, where a number of people were taken out of the company.
Hmm. I want to switch to the positive side now. When you have trust, how can you build and elevate that? And how can you play on altruistic actions from management and so on without it becoming like a greenwashing or sort of those situations? I think we've all seen good intentions from companies also have a negative trust impact.
Well, I think, it's like any relationship, whether it's a company to the public or whether it's, with your husband, wife, or partner. It's first of all listening. And, what are you being told? So
Hmm.
it's listening, realizing that there's an agenda that's going on. And if the only agenda is how do we maintain the business, and you try to put things out there that don't truly address the problems, whatever those particular problems might be, that becomes, a major issue too. So I think that it's about listening, uh, taking the feedback seriously that you get,
Hmm.
because marketplaces change. And when those marketplaces change, you need to be aware of that. And some companies are so big that that hurt isn't felt for a while. And then when it is, there's a real scramble of, what should we do and how can we correct this? But I think trust is earned, and it's also not earned by platitudes and the bullshit that you normally hear. Don't
Hmm.
call yourself sustainable if you're not sustainable, which most companies are not, but so many, particularly in the fashion world, will say they're sustainable. And now that's spread into other businesses. Patagonia, which is a phenomenal company of very high integrity, doesn't claim to be sustainable. But
Hmm.
what they say is that we minimize the harm we do and we try to fix it. And they're totally dead on and honest about what they do.
Yeah.
And I have tremendous respect for them. So it's about also honesty because, as I said earlier, you're going to get caught.
Hmm.
So tell the truth early and
Yeah.
get ahead of the story as opposed to painting yourself in a corner and then you're backing up.
It reminds me a bit. Yesterday, I had a conversation with someone in the tequila industry, and they said, um, growing agave is not saving the world. And these brands need to stop pretending that they are doing the environment good by that, right? Like, so
Right.
there's a lot of people that you're not curing cancer, but you're saying you are, and that's a problem. Where there's that inflation of the impact that people have. Um,
Right. Right. And what you have to do, by the way, when you get into this, and this is, I don't want to open too big of a topic here, but you also have to look at when companies, whether they put in a head of diversity or
yeah,
somebody who is addressing the social problems, if you really care whether or not that's real or just another, PR move,
yeah,
what you need to do is look at the organization chart of the business and see who those people report to. And
yeah,
oftentimes the level of reporting doesn't go anywhere to any power that can do anything. But they are
yeah,
hoping, it's also managing crisis through press release. You put something out there that we put a head of diversity in and, a head of diversity and inclusion, and that becomes a press release. But do they really do anything? Not
yeah,
necessarily.
yeah. And it's interesting that you mentioned that it's about lines of power in some cases. And um, there was somebody I can't exactly remember um, who it was, but they were talking about how in the investment circles in the investment world, there's a lot of conversations about how they're increasing investment in um, diverse companies and companies with diverse sets of founders. And what ended up happening was simply that all the money was siphoned off into side funds, and the main funds continue the same investment strategy. And so you saw that impact immediately, where um, even I think one of the larger funds created a nonprofit version of their fund that invested in founders of color. And the signal to that sends is very clear. It's that we don't expect you to turn a profit because you're a founder of color. Um, and then our main thesis stays the same. And so, yeah, talking about what's reality versus what's the spin is
Right.
very interesting.
Well, when I do these positionings for companies, and I certainly, I do a deep dive into who the people are that run the company, and and I do not do scripted interviews with them.
Mm-hmm.
What I do is talk to them and about various aspects of their company, and my direction is, we're two friends and we're having coffee, and you're telling me why you're excited about your company, what are the obstacles you have to overcome, what are the opportunities that are there. And so there, it comes across as all quite credible, because I want to catch them in thought, and I want them to feel like, when they're talking to their potential buyer, if it's B2B, or consumer, if it's B2C, that you're establishing trust because you're speaking honestly to those people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the goal. And I think that, again, we see that time after time, that when you get that sense that there's a real conversation, so to speak, going on between the business and their potential buyers or potential customers, there is an acknowledgement and engagement that is very attractive.
Mm-hmm.
And when you feel that you are being ignored, just like in any relationship, what comes out is anger and frustration.
Mm. Just really quick for those of you who are joining us, we're nearing the end of our time, but I'm Rob Sanchez. I'm with Jeff Madoff, and we are talking a little bit about brand and trust, and how establishing and building on that trust is kind of the critical side of brand storytelling right now, inside of the pandemic. Jeff, we're nearing the end, so I'd like to start wrapping up a little bit with broad themes and platitudes. So,
That's my law firm, as a matter of fact.
excellent,
Broad themes
excellent.
and platitudes are very good. Yes.
They do great work. So I'd love to kind of talk a little bit about where do you tell the stories now, and does the venue you tell them in have an impact on that trust and that branding?
Well, in the work that I'm doing with private equity companies and investment banks, the people that see what that result of that is are people who are being pitched,
Mm-hmm.
companies that might be interested in buying. So I become part of the presentation. The video that I create becomes part of the conversation, and the pitch.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're doing a campaign, that's something else. If you're dealing with a presentation to consumers, and let's assume there's no damage control going on, then what it is just putting out there what you do and hoping to put it out there in a sufficiently seductive way that it makes people want to engage with the product or service that you're putting out there. So they are different markets, but I believe the protocols are the same, which is that you want to win people's trust, and you want them to feel like if they do business with you, they're doing business with the right people. They'll get a quality product that they can trust, and that they have recourse if there's a problem.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good spot to stop. Any final thoughts for the audience?
No, it's no final thoughts. I would say the ongoing thought is that pay attention, because it ultimately comes down to the consumer. Pay attention to who you want to do business with, who is
Mm-hmm.
consistent with your values, who violates those values, and what is it that will move you from a position of trust to not trusting, or from not trusting to trusting. So employ critical thinking with whoever you choose to engage with, because the only way that real policy change happens is if enough people engage in the issue. And
Mm-hmm.
the hope is that the truth comes out, but align yourself with people whose values are aligned with yours. But we also live in a culture that basically buys based on price. And that is oftentimes in conflict.
Mm-hmm. I like that idea of aligning with people whose values align with you. I think that's a really good way, even for a company thinking about what investors they want to take in,
Hmm.
as well as thinking about what consumers you want to reach and so on. Who is your avatar? Really building the trust from the other side, I think, probably helps build that bridge as well.
But also, when you create that avatar, you do that. It's, an avatar is not a proxy for the truth.
Hmm.
And so, what you want to try to do is another word that's been pounded into the ground, but be authentic and be honest with the intention of your company and your company's actions.
Hmm.
And because eventually you will be found out if you're doing something wrong, and you will be supported if it's right. Patagonia once again became over $1 billion company that's still privately owned, and they have been true to their principles from the beginning. And I just have,
Hmm.
I had Vincent Stanley, who wrote The Responsible Corporation, with Yvon Chouinard, who was the founder of Patagonia. And I left that interview, I had him in my class, and I was just so taken with what an amazing company it is and how
Hmm.
consistent they're aligned with their values, as are the people that buy from them. And so I think that it's just really important. We all hope in the end truth will out. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. But you can have an impact on the company if you impact consumer behavior.
Hmm. Um, we're kind of we're in a time when we need people to start stepping up in different ways, and we need actions to start to shift dramatically. And just thinking like all of the tipping points we've hit in the last year. So it can't go above 2%. Well, let's try 3. And that's kind of where we're at now. And so it's interesting that this is the conversation we're having, because this is kind of the next step in our society, is how do we get past the shouting to the relationship building, to the trust, to the rebuilding, and seeing what a future looks like when we work together. So thank
So
you.
tell a story, but tell a true story.
Yeah. It also makes me think about how apologies are for yourself and actions are for others. Um, so, um, I do want to end with you telling us a little bit about personality and the Lloyd Price musical, and sharing about that and what you've created and where it's going to be, and the timing as well.
So, Personality, the Lloyd Price musical, is about the life of Lloyd Price. Most of you might not know who he is. If you Google Lloyd Price and you listen to his music, songs like Personality and Stagger Lee, that not only he performed and made #1 hits, the Beatles, Bruce Springsteen, Elvis Presley, Amy Winehouse, all the people that have covered his work is quite impressive. Uh, when Lloyd recorded his first song in 1952, Lottie Miss Claudie, another song that's been covered by hundreds of people you've heard of, that also served to break down the wall that was called race music. Lloyd is
Hmm.
black, and if you wanted to buy records by black artists, you had to go to black-owned record stores. That was called race music.
Hmm.
But his first song, Lottie Miss Claudie, sold over 1 million copies. That was a first for a teenager. And nobody is prejudiced against green. So that broke down the wall of race records. Lloyd went on to become an entrepreneur. He was the first person of any color to start his own label. And he opened the door to black musicians, but also to young musicians, because the music business used to be a strictly adult business up until the mid 50s.
Hmm.
So I wrote a play about Lloyd. I had met him. I had done a documentary about him, and I was so taken by him, his personality, which is so charismatic, his attitude, which was always optimistic and never bitter, despite all the issues he had to face.
Hmm.
And I told him, I know I can capture your voice. I want to tell your story. And I wrote the first couple of scenes. He loved it, and we started working together. And it's been a long process. but we have a theater deal. We are opening at People's Light Theater in Malvern, Pennsylvania on March 6th, running through the 27th. Lloyd's story is, and that's after a year COVID delay, by the way. And Lloyd's story is inspirational, true, and the only sadness that I have about it, because I'm so happy with where we are, I'm involved with Tony Award winning talent. I wrote the play and I'm the producer of it. And Lloyd's story is so incredible, and he's an unsung hero. And unfortunately, he died May 5th at the age of 87, 88. He had just recently turned 88.
Mm-hmm.
And I lost a dear friend, but telling his story, my hope is it really creates his legacy piece, where people will understand the incredible and invaluable contribution he made to popular culture and popular music and race relations.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you're giving him that voice. And I've had the opportunity to watch some of the early read-throughs, and I love it. It's really touching and inspiring, and I can't wait to see it open.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. So Jeff, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation. I think this was a timely conversation as well. Facebook is kind of in the news right now for that breach of trust. And so it is interesting to reflect and see what that means for a brand and how it's going to impact. And let's see if the biggest brand in the world changes significantly as a result of that. So again, thank you for joining me. I'm Rob Sanchez, the CEO of MouthMedia, and follow us for more great business conversations.
Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, thank you.